So the most important point that we've discussed so far is that according to Tosfos, you only apply the principle of Kavuah if it's Nikar Bimkomo. And apparently, in the case in Zvachim, on Daf Ayin Gimel that we mentioned earlier, it's not Nikar Bimkomo. So that we saw on the bottom of the last page, that's Kuf Beis, that we have to choose this halacha of Kemechz al Mechz in the case of a mixture of animals only because midrabanan it has a din of Kavuah. But on a Doraisa level, since we don't know and we can't point to any particular animal and say, well, that's the Isur, it's not Nikar Bimkomo, we do not apply the principle of Kol Kavuah Kemechz al Mechz Dami. And therefore, the entire sugya in Zvachim is on a Drabanan level. Now, in the next two paragraphs, on page Kuf Gimel, one that starts with Birkas HaRosh and the other with Shari Yoshar, they discuss the Drabanan level of Kavuah. For example, in the Gemara in Zvachim, when the Rabbanan said we're going to apply Kavuah to Bali Chaim, to animals, so that's a Drabanan. Hoil sheyachal akachas asa isuli ochlo. Right, so you have a situation where, if you don't apply the Kavuah, you might go ahead and eat any of the animals. You might even eat all the animals. So you're dealing with the entire group of animals, and therefore the Rabbanan are machmir, because he might end up eating that animal that's awesome. But in our case, in the sugya in Nazir, where he sent a shliach to Mekadesh and Isha, here we're only dealing with this particular woman that he wants to marry. And if we can apply the principle called DeParush and Rov, because it's not Nikar Bimkomo, then even on a Drabanan level, we don't prohibit it. That's the Birkei Rosh and the Birkas HaRosh. And then we have the Shari Yoshar, who claims that according to Tosfos, even on a Drabanan level, if there's no Nikar Isur, ain't no Osur. It's not even Osur midrabanan. But then we're going to be stuck with the sugya in Zvachim. So he says that a taroves of Bali Chaim, even if there's no din of Kavuah, is Asur Drabanan, because, as we said before, the entire taroves is right here b'fanenu, including that which is Asur. So if a person would want to take out one animal from this mixture and say, well, this came from the rov, then you could always say to him, well, how do you know that this animal came from the rov? Maybe this animal came from the mute. So there's some logic to wanting being machmir rabbanon and apply the principle of kemechz al mechzedam. But in the case of the shliach, the women are not in front of us. In other words, you don't have all the women in the world. You're only dealing with this one particular woman that he wants to mekadesh, and therefore the rabbanon will be making. And it's not even also rabbanon. Okay, fine. Now, he quotes Chidushei Agrach al Hashas here, which, as you know, is Reb Chaim Brisker. But he says that we need to know that there's some Isur in front of us bivados, meaning like in the case of the butcher shops, we know for sure that there's one butcher shop that is selling non-kosher food. And in such a case, when the suffix is nolad b'makom kvius, we apply kol kavuah k'mechzal mechzah dami. But we're not going to go a step further and say that if we don't have the Isur b'fanenu, right? That's what he calls lo nemar din ze el ksha Isur nimtza l'fanenu b'vados. So this chiddush, this new halacha of Kavuah, only applies when we know that there's some Isur for sure that's in front of us. But when he's coming to Mekadesh this Isha, we don't have a Vade Isur b'fanenu. You know, somewhere in the world is the woman that the Shliach married off, but we don't have her in front of us. So we need those butcher shops right in front of us. Okay, now he has here a quote from the base mayor. You see where it says, V'chein misbayer, b'divrei base mayor, Yoredeya Siman Kuf Yud. So that's going to be the Siman in Yoredeya, which deals with this issue of Kol Kavuah K'mechzal Mechzadam. But then he says, Aval Rashba Eino Soverke. So if I understand correctly, the base mayor is saying that the Rashba disagrees, and he holds that you can apply the principle of Kavuah even if it's not Nikar B'mkoma. But he doesn't tell you exactly which Rashba it is. So if we assume that it's the Rashba in Gittin, who doesn't explain the way Tosfos does, namely that it's mutter because of Kavuah Sheinu Nikar, so he doesn't make a distinction between Nikar and Eino Nikar. He doesn't say that the Sugya Zvachim is only Darbanan, even though it's Eino Nikar. However, apparently, that's on an absolute, there's no absolute clarity here. But there's another Rashba in Chulin who writes, Dim ein sham Isur barur, heich nomar bo Kavuah. I mean, the language of the Rashba in Gittin was sort of unclear. He's not committed one way or the other, but in Chulin, he sounds like he's reiterating what we saw in Tosfos, that you need an Isur barur in order to apply the principle of Kavuah. You have to know that there is an Isur there. And you have to recognize that Isur. That's called an Isur barur. It's got to be Nikar B'mkoma. So we're back to square one here because we don't know why the base mayor says that the Rashba doesn't agree. In the next paragraph that starts with Be'emes, he quotes the Bach, and the Bach is in Orach Chaim. I think it says Tov Reish Daled. I think Tov Reish Daled, which I could look up. That's probably Hilchas Chametz. Shenechshav leKavuah. So if it's Eino Nikar, according to the Bach, it's still called Kavuah. But the Taz, Sivkat and Daled, so again, I assume it's the Taz and Orach Chaim, Hisig bazeh she'eino nechshav Kavuah. Ure'eh b'chidush echsam sofer shemefakfek al divrei HaTaz. So the Taz reiterates what we said in Tosfos, that it's not Kavuah if it's not Nikar B'mkomo. But like some Sofer says, Midivrei Ramah Misbayer Ke'abach Sha'af Bazeh Nechshav Kavuah. So it seems that there's a real serious issue here amongst the poskim, a great controversy, as to whether we apply Kavuah in a case of Eino Nikar. Now he quotes another sugya in Avodah Zarah. Seems to be on Chaf Beis Amid Beis, and Tosfos there says that Gam Makom Sheino Barur Sheyesh Isur. Aval Yefsha Shelo is Arvu. In other words, if we know for sure that there's Isur mixed up here, even though we don't know where the Isur is, Omrim Bazek Kol Kavuah Kemechzal Mechzedam. So it doesn't have to be Nikar B'mkomo that we can identify the Isur, but if we know for certain that there is Isur here, that's enough to establish Kol Kavuah Kemechzal Mechzedam. But in a case where it's Eino Vadai Isur Lefanenu, we're not sure that there is an Isur here, then we don't apply Kavuah. He has a discussion here. What's Vadai Isur Lefanenu? Let's say there's circumstantial evidence. Is that enough? Or do you have to be absolutely certain? So now he summarizes in the paragraph Ach, Shitas HaTosfos, Shedafka Mikoach She'eno Nikar Hikilu Bazeh. They were more lenient without applying Kavuah in a case of Eino Nikar, because the precondition for Kavuah is Nikar. But in the Sugya Zvachim, there apparently we know that there's an Isur mixed into this whole corral of animals. Im Haya Isur Yadua Bivados, that we know that there is an Isur there, then we suspend the principle of Kavuah. And that's what we saw earlier in the name of the Graph. Okay, so all this is like Roman numeral number 1, Shitas HaTosfos. Now we get on, and the Rashba we said we're not sure. Now we get on to the Ramban in Gittin, and he asks the following kasha on Tosfos. Ma Isur yesh bazeh shemina shliach lekadish lo isha stam. Why are we, according to Tosfos, penalizing the Mishaleach, and therefore he's also a kol anoshim sheba'olam, because he did a terrible thing? What did he do? He sent the shliach without telling the shliach which woman to marry for him. Correct the Ramban, does he really deserve such a punishment? It didn't even entertain his mind that before the shliach would notify him who he married on his behalf, he would die. Odehiksha Ramban, im kol aknas hu mishum shemino lekadish lo isha achas, madua tolsa zosa gemara b'chazoka shliach osa shlichusa. I'm not sure exactly what bothers the Ramban about that. I mean, we have to know that the shliach was Makayim in shlichus. Odehik Sharamban, Mimasha Omru Bigemara, Shachazok Shlichos Shlichusa, Nemar Afilu Lekul. All right, so the Ramban has a bunch of kashas on Tosas. Lakach Pirish Ramban, Shekol Anoshim Mutaras Li Nase, Afilu Ktanos Shemeis Avien, Mishum Shebecheskas Pnuyoshem. Notice the halacha doesn't assume that a woman is married until we know for sure that she was married. And even though we have a chazaka that the shliach was Makayim Shlichus and he married one of these women, that's not enough to undermine the chazaka. Aval HaMishalech Osir B'Noshim Sheyesh Lahem Krovos. Right? Any woman that has relatives, and there's a possibility that the shliach married off this man to one of her relatives, he can't marry her. Lefi she'ein chazaka shel krovos she'ein pnuyos mo'eles lo kevan she'ein osa krovos bos lefanenu kidei shenidon osa b'cheskes pnuyos. So I guess what he's saying is that you can't accept a chazaka, establish a chazaka that these women were never married unless they're here in front of us. So apparently there's a whole literature here on trying to explain the Ramban. Well, let's see. Let's see on Daf Kuf Dalid for a moment. Hine nechlaku arishonim. This is kind of like a summary. Im Kavuah sheinu nikar osam min haTorah rak min rabbanim. So we have now machlokes. Tosas shita is that if it's eino nikar, then it's only the rabbanim, and only under certain circumstances. However, apparently, there's another Tosas in Menachos that gives you the impression that even if it's Eino Nikar B'Mkomo, because he quotes here a Beis Meir that says that that's also the opinion of the Rashba and the Ran in Chulin, which we saw before, that the Rashba, according to the Beis Meir, disagrees with Tosas. Ulam HaTosas b'Psachim noktu lehedja shu rak min rabbanon. So despite what it says in Tosas Menachos, which we don't know exactly what it says there, but in Tosas Psachim, he supports the Tosas and Gittin that we started with. And if it's Eino Nikar, it's not Kavuah Midorais, it's only Kavuah Midorabbanan. And apparently the Achronim here, the Pri Chodesh and others are going to analyze Tosas in Chulin and Tosas in Zvachim to figure out where those Tosas fit into this picture. And then he says at the end of this paragraph, V'chein muvur b'sefer akrisus l'Rab Shimon Mikinon shekavuah she'eino nikar eino begeder kavuah. V'prima gadim Yordei Simon Kuf Yud in Sifsei Das Kosav al Divrei Ramban shelo birer im osem in a Torah midrabanan. So even the Ramban, who seems to argue against Tosfos and drops the requirement of nikar b'mkomo, he might agree that that's only midrabanan. That's the prima gonim. I find this a little bit odd, This is antithetical to a lot of what we say. And then he quotes the Binas Adam, that's the Chachmas Adam, who says that L'das Ramban yesh din Kavuah afilu she'ena isa nikar b'mkom. Okay, so that's what we've been waiting for all this time, that we've been presenting and reviewing the Shitas HaTosfos, that it's not Kavuah unless it's nikar b'mkomo. And now the Binas Adam is establishing that according to the Ramban, there's Kavuah even if ena isa nikar b'mkomo. The Hare Zeh Isa Min Torah. We're not talking about a Drabanan. In the next paragraph, Abe Shmuel Kosav, Shelech Ora, Yenafgemina Ben Tosus Ramban, B'mikra Sha'ovar HaMeshalech V'Kiddush Lo Isha. So L'chatchila, we said he's not allowed to marry any woman in the world because of Kol Kavuah. And we have machlokes between the Ramban, who says that's a Doraisa halacha, and Tosfos, who says it's only D'Rabbanan. Now he went ahead and he violated the Isur. He was Mekadesh a woman. Im Kiddusha Kiddushin. So let's just think about that. According to the Ramban, L'chorah the Kiddush should not be Chal. According to the Rambam, at least on a Doraisa level, it should be Chal. Let's see what he says. Oh, Shaladas HaTosfos Yeh Kiddushin Gemurin. Sharei meikar adin mutalo lekadish, v'rak midin knas asro lekadish, but b'diavad v'kedushin achal. Ach l'das rabban havi sofek kedushin. Sofek kedushin because kol kavuah is kimech tzal mechzah doni. So we don't know if she's married or she's not married. Or let me be more precise: if her sister was married off. So if you take a look at a paragraph that starts with Kosav Keren Ora, he comes up with another nafkamina between the Tosfos and the Ramban in a case where he has a relative who's an erva and he doesn't know where she is. He can't. I don't mean he doesn't know how to locate her. It's not a matter of sending out secret. He doesn't know who she is. He knows he has a relative. You can imagine after the Holocaust or something like that. So any woman in the world could potentially be his erva. According to Tosfos, it's Eino Isur Nikar B'mkomo. So we're not going to apply Kavuah. He's based on Rov. He can marry any woman in the world. But according to Tosfos, even though it's not Nikar B'mkomo, we're going to still apply Kavuah, and it's Kemech Tzal Mechza, then once again, he's not allowed to marry any woman in the world. Okay, now on the left column here on Kuf Dalet, he goes back to the original. You remember we had an original Machlokas HaMefarshim there, and we didn't understand the second interpretation. Maybe now it'll become clear. Nechleku rishonim b'bir hakavua. Just 1 second. I'm going to have to print out more of these pages. Like how we're up to Kuf Dalid. So 1 second. So how many pages do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 5 pages here, I think. Let's see. So I'm going to need, let's say, 6 to 8. All right. So he says the following. According to one interpretation, Hanidon ala isha shedonim alel. Right. So he wants to marry this woman, and the question is, can he marry her? Correct? That was the first shot. Because maybe she's the relative of his wife. Oh, Shamidubar al ha'isha shehi shorish hasafek. So this was the second shot. We're going back to the woman, and we're trying to figure out, who was it that the shliach married on behalf of the Mishaleh? Ubiglal krovosera asuroslo. Just 1 second. Al isha she shorish hasafek shehu. Or shehi, it should be shehi ha-mesapek shalonu. Ha-mesapek, interesting language. Mesapek. Like we have an oser and a post-sale, we have a mesapek. Klomar ha-isha ha-hi shizkacha. Right, that woman that accepted Kedushin. Ubiglala, and as a result of her, except the Kedushin or Krovasasura, so he can't marry any of our relatives. Shemhi nimtzeis b'shuk. Right, the woman that he married is out there in the shuk. We don't know that that's so, but let's consider that possibility. Uparish v'halach achar rov. Right, so since she's moving around in the shuk, so she's considered naidi, but im nimtzeis bebeisa nechsheves kavuah umecht al mecht. Well, how do you understand that? She's at home, and therefore any woman might be the sister of that woman. And the suffix is a result of what causes the suffix. What generates the suffix is the woman sheniskacha al yidei shliach v'hi bebeisa. So therefore, we're going to say about all the women in the world that are mechzal mechza, it's a suffix when they are her relatives. So in other words, we go back to the original source of the suffix, and we determine whether the source of the suffix is nikar b'mkomo, or Kavuah, or Naidi. All right. Now he goes on to the case of a woman who was raped. Just 1 second. So that's page Kuf Vav. So I'm just looking here for a moment. On the bottom line, on the right column of page Kuf Hey, because I'm trying to find the highlights here. He says, Ha'im donin ala mesapek, o ala chaticha ha'misupekes. So this is the machlokes that we spoke about. Do we go back to the mesapek, and where is she? The one that accepted Kedushin. Is she in her house, Kavuah, or is she out in the shuk and it's night? Oh, ala chaticha mesupekes, or the woman that he wants to marry now, where is she? Okay. So he claims here, which I don't know enough to evaluate this, that Tosas and Ksubis and the Russian Nazir are of the opinion that we go back to the Shoresh HaSafek, meaning to that woman who accepted Kedusha. Hamasapik. Whereas Rashi and Tosfos in Nazir, they're on the other side of the coin, of the river. They hold that we're dealing with the woman that he wants to marry now, who's Bifanenu. Ulabir inyan zeh, this seems to be a pretty fundamental issue in Kavuah, is yesh la'akdim ketzad hu hagdoras hasfekos. I think the next word is bichlal, maybe. Unfortunately, didn't come out clearly. Ha'im geder, I think it says. Ha'im geder ha'safek hu lefi ha'she'ela b'hanhaga l'maisa. Ha'im lesar leheter. O she'gidre ha'safek him lefi hisyaldus ha'chashoshos b'lev ha'mistapek. Shulo haya boli de safek il molei sheyesh tzad b'libo shema hu kach v'kach. Ulefi ze yesh tzad isur umemele dini ha'safek yitochet shenemru klape anidon sheyesh b'libo shel ha'mistapek. Whoa. I mean, the language sounds almost philosophical here. So I'm going to just try to summarize in my own words what I think he is vacillating about. He says that we might understand that the question of Kavuah versus Kol DeParush Meruba Parish, that question is a reflection of the issue, the practical issue at hand. We have to determine Isur v'Heter. And therefore, we look at the woman that he wants to marry now. Or, no. We go back to the original Leidas HaSafek, right? The person who's asking the question, he's not just asking, well, can I marry this woman or not? He's really asking, which is the woman that that the shliach married on my behalf, and as a result, I cannot marry her relatives. In his language, he calls it his yaldus achashoshos belev hamistape. Again, the language is very philosophical. In other words, he realizes that this whole suffix about whether he could marry Leah depends upon where is Rachel, or who is Rachel. And therefore, Leah that I want to marry now, is she considered to be a suffix or not? Because we're going to apply mechza al mechza back to the Rachel who, well, we're just giving her a name, but we don't know who she is, who received Kiddushin from the Shliach. Now, in the next paragraph, he creates some sort of an analogy to the halacha of Safek Tuma versus Hayachid. I think he's trying to prove from that sugya that it really depends upon the safek as it is in the leiv hamistapik. Notice he doesn't know whether he had contact with tum or not. So that has to do with a concept called ein bodas li shoel, or yesh bodas li shoel. Now, in the paragraph V'ata, he really goes far with this. He says, Yesh lodun ketzad namshich lodun es asafek lemeshach kol hazman. Ha'im tamid yesh ledas safek michadash. There's always a brand new, the safek like regenerates itself constantly. Shekol rega v'rega yesh nidon ha'im mutar o aser. So every moment he's going to ask whether it's mutar or aser, which I assume he's connecting to that side that we have to address this woman that he wants to marry. Shema kevan shayoledas asafik ukfar danu alel li olam yeh. I can't read the next word. Ha'amodas, I think it says. Ha'amodas hatzdodim k'mo shahoy b'tchila. So this is the second possibility. That we're not going to recreate the suffix on a constant perpetual basis, but rather we already how should I say, we already came to some conclusion and we issued some verdict with regard to the suffix. Tzad shlishi yesh lomar she'ein halacha she'yidonu tamid lefi dino rishon mikol kam dina shechali eli olam ha'safek nimshach kamo b'shar rishon lefi tzadei ha'safek shel hagorim. So let's take a look at the paragraph Kosav. Kishalo ba liodenu Eliachar shepirish. Now, what's this? Avol de inhu? Is that what it says here? De inhu? De inhu?
Is it the word liadenu?
Say it again. What is the word? I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Liadenu.
Diadenu?
Liadenu.
I don't see Diadenu there. Say it one more time.
Looking at the wrong.
Are you in the paragraph Kosav Arif Aran?
That's it, liadenu. Yes. The first word on the second line.
Liadenu, I see. Avol. Do you see the word avol in that paragraph? In that line, I mean? What was the word after avol? That's where I got stuck.
Oh.
It looks like the inhu. I would have to ask my daughter to send it again, because this is the Masifta Nazir, which I returned to my son-in-law. Avol the inhu. Yeah, but after the nun, there seems to be a vav or something. I suspect that he's talking about what's called Kavuah Mafreya. I think. I don't know. He doesn't use that term. That's what bothers me. So something was poresh mina Kavuah, and he only knew about it. He found out about it after it was poresh. So the one who's asking the shaila, who's mistapek, oh, I see. The word is ra'inhu. Now I got it. Ra'inuhu. Ra'inuhu. So what happens? He saw something jump out of the Kavuah. And already at that point, he should be asking himself, what is it that jumped out of the Kavuah? Right? But he didn't ask that question, meaning he saw it jump out of the Kavuah, but he didn't ask any questions at that point. Now he's holding on to something, and all of a sudden it dawns on him, hey, I got to ask myself whether this is Isur or Mutter. Is this treif or kosher? And that's what he says, Shloboli Adenu Eliachar Shapiresh. Because by the time we get the question, and a person, says in front of the rabbi, here's a package, I don't know if it's treif or kosher meat. So it's already pirish. But he saw it being porish min kavuah. Das Haran, I guess it's the Ran in Chulin, shekol shelo bo liyodo shel hamistapek b'mokom kviuso, since his suffek now is on this piece of meat that he's holding on to, and it's not in a mokom kavua, afal pisha ra oso porish min kavua, he saw with his own eyes how it came out of one of the butcheries. Midina midoraisa mutal liolam. The fact that it was kavua an hour ago or 5 minutes ago is irrelevant. Why? Because there was no psak of kavua at that moment, because he didn't ask any questions at that moment. Lo nechshav kekavua el b'makom kviyusa. Only if he asks the question now, as he's in the Mokum Kavuah. I mean, you ask, what difference does it make? Ha'im nomar kan klal al shas ledas hasofek. Should we say that the determining factor which is called shas ledas hasofek, where at that moment you could say it was Kavuah, or now you could say it's ledas hasofek now and it's Parush. Should we say that the first moment that generates ledas hasofek is a suffix shenogel lanu before? At that moment that it jumped out, we didn't have any question in front of us. We didn't have to respond and determine anything. So again, it goes back to that difference that we spoke about between the Gorem HaSafek, we call it the Mesapek, he called it, or the practical question itself. If we put all the emphasis on the practical question, well, now it's Parush. But if you go back to the Mesapek, to the origin and the source of the Safek, then it was Kavuah. Let me see if I can read that into the language here. Ha'im nomar, that's where I want to start from. I hope that's a good place to start from. Ha'im nomar kan klal al shas ledas hasafek mipnei sharega rishon shenolad hasafek shenogel lanu befal banhogas hadin hu hakovea shechal bodini hasafek. Okay, that's very, very vague, but we'll try to work backwards. Oh, shelo beglal rega ledas hasafek ela ofen anidon ba'modas dodei hamisapek mishtana lefi. Well, the language is a killer here. Mishtana lefi ofen hamitzius sheba nigram la mistapek lodun besafek v'zeu safek acher k'shenimtza b'chanius. V'zeu safek echad k'shenimtza b'chanius v'safek acher k'shenimtza b'shuk. Now, I mean, there seems to be, he's vacillating here about, I think, what you call the objective suffix and the subjective suffix. You remember that he had a language back in the paragraph ulabirur on the top of this left column. Hisyaldus hachashashos belev hamistapik on the third line. So that's a subjective suffix, belev hamistapik. Which I understood, again, I hope I'm not off the beat here, off the mark, that he's going back to the woman who received Kiddushin from the Shliach. That's where the suffix begins in the Lev HaMistapik. And I think he's repeating that here in the at the end of the paragraph, Kosav Haran Varif, Haran Barif. And I think he's saying that if we go back to the Lev HaMistapek, then this is Kavuah. Hayim nomar kan klal al shas leidas hasofek mipnei shebarega harishon shenolad sofek shenogel lanu befoal vanhogas hadin hu hakover. So here he's talking about the objective sofek. The sofek itself, as it's nogel lanu befoal vanhogas hadin, that's the objective sofek. And that's called the DeParush Meruba Parish. That's Koven. Oh, and here I think he's talking about the subjective sofek. Shelo beglal regel ledis hasofek hukach. Which I think he means the moment in which we have to deal with this case in a hanogas hadin, ela sha'ofen anidon ba'amodas stade asofek hamesapek. Lefi ofen hamitzius sheba nigram lamistapek. Do you see that subjective element? What was the reality, the scenario, the mitzius that caused the suffix in the mind of the mistapik? Let's try to, again, I don't want to keep you too long, it's getting late, but let's see if we can fit in one more paragraph here. Ukefishes bayer nefliku bazach ronin shabes meir Nokat shakol nikba lefiz manu matzav chalos hasafek, which I think means when he actually asked the question, it's already parish. Vashariyosha nokat shakol nikba lefi ofen haistapkus, which I think means in the mind and the heart of the mistapek. Shasafek mishtane lefi ledas. Look at that. Lefi ledas unefilas hasafek belev hamistapek. Not the objective suffix as a chalos suffix at the time that the question is being presented and dealt with, but rather the subjective element of nefilas hasafek belev hamistapek, which would take you back to Kavuah in this case. So I would put those last four words together, combining it with the third line of Lebirur, Lefi Hisyaldus Achashashos Belev HaMistapek. Okay, then. I mean, again, this is a gigantic sugya here. Try to make a little dent in it, and Amir Hashem will return to our regular leave. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to make a siyum in my group over there at 9:45 on Sota, and then start the first daf of Masech Git. So I guess we'll pick it up in Mitzvah on Sunday. Well, let me just add one point.